Hello and a warm welcome to our last Youth Research Dialogue in 2025. The RAY Youth Research Dialogues are regularly conducted with the aim to discuss evidence-based research from the RAY network and beyond. I'm Carmen Tobel-Kiviniemi. I'm the Coordinator Project Manager for the European Youth Research Network RAY, which is hosted by the Finnish National Agency for Education. The RAY network currently involves 36 partners in 34 countries, including national agencies responsible for the European youth programs and national researchers. Today we will discuss dimensions of organizational learning. The RAY network is currently conducting a research project on organizational learning and development in Erasmus Youth and the European Solidarity Corps. The RAY Learn research involves qualitative and quantitative methods, but it also has a very special component to it. Last month, we hosted a RAY Learn conference in the European Youth Center in Budapest. The conference brought beneficiary organizations, which are directly involved in the research, as well as RAY NA colleagues and RAY researchers together. The event aimed to reward the organizations and, of course, the people involved in the organizations for their contribution to the research. It provided a space for networking and for exchanging with each other. And of course, the participants had the chance to get to know the preliminary RAY findings from the Learn project and to interact with them and discuss them. During the discussion today, we will reflect on the preliminary RAY Learn findings, including challenges, resources, and practices. We will also discuss how the European youth programs can or cannot support strategic organizational learning. Furthermore, we will explore internal and external challenges, potentials, and patterns for organizational learning in general. And finally, we will talk about how to move forward with this topic in the European youth programs and beyond. Andrea Horta from the transnational research team of the RAY network will provide insights into the RAY Learn research and will tell us more about the first findings. Andrea works for Youth Policy Lab, a small research agency and think tank in the youth sector based in Berlin. She has a research background in neuroscience and psychology. Really great to have you with us here today. Our guest speaker will bring invaluable insights from a broader perspective on organizational learning, focusing on organizations as living systems. Welcome to Darko Markovic. He is a systemic coach, facilitator, and consultant based in Belgrade, and he founded the Systemic Solution Institute as well. Darko has been involved in the youth field locally and internationally for 30 years, contributing to strategic processes related to youth work development and recognition. And as a coach and consultant, he supports leaders, organizations, and larger systems in making future-ready shifts. And recently, he published also a book on systemic changes in organizations. Happy to have you with us today. Our team today is Tomi Kilakoski, our moderator, and as always, Domagoj Moric, our digital facilitator. That's from my side. Have a good dialogue. See you for the closing. And now to you, Tomi.
Hello, my name is Tomi Kilakoski, and I will be your moderator today. And I warmly welcome you to this edition of the RAY Youth Research Dialogue. A theorist of learning organizations, Peter Senge, has said that individual learning does not guarantee organizational learning, but without it, namely individual learning, no organizational learning occurs. In the youth field, we are used to talking about my learning or your learning. Yet the perspective of organizational learning remains less discussed. Theorists of organizational learning point out that organizations may learn without plans, but their learning can be hindered by internal and external barriers. Therefore, it's better to adopt a systemic approach. But how do we do that? And are the European youth programs able to help us with it? What are the dimensions of organizational learning? These are the themes we are going to talk about today. Before we dive into the discussion, I would like to remind you that the audience has a great opportunity to join the dialogue. We invite you to ask questions either on Facebook or YouTube chats or via Slido. Simply go to slido.com and type in the code which is displayed now on the screen. Our first speaker today is Andrea Horta. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tommy. I wanted to start by giving a very quick context of what ReLearn is about and what we're doing. The main question behind ReLearn is how can we promote strategic organizational learning and development within the context of the European Youth programs, meaning for the beneficiary organizations that participate in the programs and using the programs as a tool. And what we mean by promoting strategic organizational learning and development is how can we make it easier for beneficiaries to develop on purpose and not just reactively, not just by accident. This is a general question that we're trying to answer. The more specific questions are what kinds of beneficiaries do the programs cater to, especially in terms of their characteristics that are relevant for their learning and development. What are their needs of these beneficiaries, the different needs for the types, and how do these beneficiaries use the programs? What are there specific ways to use the programs? And hopefully with all that information, we can say something about how to make it easier for them to develop strategically or how to nudge them in that direction, at least, using the programs as a tool. And to answer these questions, we did three main things. We included some questions related to organizational learning and development, related to knowledge transfer specifically in our monitoring surveys, which go to project leaders and project participants of KA1, volunteering projects, and TCA-NET activities. We are also doing a mapping of the Salto training calendar offers and looking at how they relate or how they try to, whether they try to impact the organizational level. And we did, or we're doing, a series of focus groups with 40 participant organizations across 10 European countries. We are in the middle of doing this still, especially the focus groups. We are going to do 4 per organization. We have done 2. The third one is ongoing as I talk. So this is very much not done yet. But we did get to do some things with the data that we already have at transnational level. And what we did with this data so far is the following. We compiled a list of challenges and resources that are relevant for beneficiaries in general of the organization of the European Youth programs. This helps us understand what these beneficiaries are developing around, like what they're trying to achieve, what they have to overcome when they're in their development, and what their main assets or their main resources to do this are. Then, of course, we group the beneficiaries into types, because that was one of our main questions. What types of beneficiaries do we have? And we group them into types based on how they were created, how they use the programs, and how they operate. And then we took a look at the different tools that the programs offer, the different key actions and other kinds of tools, and saw or tried to find out what the effect of these tools is at organizational level, and what's working for promoting strategic development and what's not working yet. And also, in exploring all this, we have run into some tensions that we think are relevant specifically for strategic learning and development at the organizational level in the youth field. The most relevant one is the tension between having to have a simple and informal everyday functioning, but at the same time needing to stay resilient and needing to see opportunities coming and needing some strategy and some formality to do this. We will talk more about these findings and these tensions in the rest of the dialogue, but for now I wanted to share some key points that I think are relevant and that I think are already there from the data that we have so far. The first one is that the programs do foster organizational learning, but the second one is that they struggle when it comes to, or that fostering or supporting strategic development, not just organizational learning, but doing it strategically, is a lot more difficult because it often seems like it clashes with the informality or the working conditions in the youth field, where organizations don't have time or don't have funds to spend in stopping and thinking and strategizing. Then we did find different kinds of beneficiaries with different kinds of skills, different kinds of goals. This is also a finding. And we also found that experiences where more than one person is involved, for example, when an organization is putting together a training or when an organization is putting together a mobility, it usually involves a team. It usually does have an impact at the organizational level, especially when compared to experiences or interactions with the programs where it is just one person interacting, for example, sending a person to a trainer or a youth worker to a mobility. And now the question with all these findings is how can we use this knowledge to help beneficiaries or to inspire beneficiaries to develop a culture of organizational foresight. Like I said, we're still kind of thinking of how to approach this question, and this is what we're going to address and develop a bit more in the rest of the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you kindly, Andrea. It's time for Darko Markovic to speak. Darko, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Tommy and the team. It's a pleasure to be in this array talk about one of my passions about organizational development, organizational learning from a systemic approach. As mentioned in the introduction, I wrote a book which is called Systemic Change in Organizations, currently in Serbian and hopefully in English by March next year. But let's see what systemic approach can bring us in the context of organizational learning. Anybody who has any organization that you belong to, that you work for, that you established, you know that organization has a life. Organization has a life that starts with birth and goes to mostly kind of childhood, going to adolescence, getting more stronger, getting more fit, getting more clear, getting more structured, getting more strategic, coming to some kind of stable stage. And then the question is actually what happens after. Very often, this is the turning point for many organizations, actually, how to continue their life. Very often, they try to do the old ways, which are not working anymore, but maybe the world changes. And then the question is what to do next. But I will come to this in a couple of seconds. So if organizations have life, we can say, like in the next slide, that it is more true to say that organizations are not like machines. In fact, in many ways, in many management theories, and not only in our field, but in other fields, it's so common to see organizations as machines, which actually has a lot of consequences on understanding organizational change and learning. Because if organizations are machines, then they cannot learn. But what systemic approach is actually suggesting that we rather need to acknowledge that organizations are rather intelligent living systems, and actually as a living systems like ourselves, like others, organizations can learn too. So not only individuals, not only individual members, but also organizational systems as whole. In the next slide, I will also tell you one wonderful quote from Gregory Bateson. He said, "The major problems in the world are the result of the difference between how nature works and the way people think." this is reflected in organizations very often in organizational charts. And everybody who works in an organization knows that organizational charts usually are just theory. So the world looks much different, much more complex, and the organizational life is much more complex than actually any organizational chart can show. So we could say that every organization has these two sides: managerial reality expressed in charts and the reality of the living system underneath. So in order to understand organizations fully, we need to understand how living systems work. And one of the key foundational concepts in understanding organizations as living systems is to see organization as a whole that is greater than some of its parts, meaning that organization as a whole might behave differently than its parts. And there are also some properties that actually belong only to the whole. So we can also speak about organizational learning, not only in terms of learning of the parts, but also learning of the whole. In the next slide, I can tell you maybe if you want to see organization as an interconnected whole, and you can also say that organization has a memory. You know how things are kind of memorized. Even when people leave, some memory remains, some patterns remain. So organization is an interconnected whole that has memory, it has patterns, and it has also potential to be realized. Coming back to Peter Senge that Tommy mentioned in the beginning, he has interesting division or different concept of the distinguishing between two types of organizational learning. He said there's adaptive learning that's actually serves survival of the organization, basically how to do things differently, how to do things better, how to survive challenges, how to be more resilient. But there is also generative learning. And this is an interesting thing that actually organizations not only learn how to do things better, but they can also learn about themselves, about what's our role in this world, who we are for the outside world, and how can we actually reinvent ourselves as organizations, which actually providing the next point, we can say that the U curve or the bell curve from the beginning of my presentation, it could be the beginning of the end. It could be almost decline and the death of the organization, but this is the moment when organization in its peak is also invited for reinvention and rebirth. And this is this moment when organizations and people in organizations who need to provide space to let go of the old ways, of the old patterns, and let emerge the new patterns and maybe the new purpose of the organization that needs to be born. So we can say that organization development is kind of series of reinvention or rebirth moments. And last bit of my intervention here, I know it's dense, but I can tell you, you can look at the organizational learning from more I, from more individual, or from more we, which is kind of more collective, more systemic, and also from what's more internal and more external. As an I, as individuals, we learn about mindsets, what kind of mindset is needed in this organization, and also we learn how to belong here. How is it to belong in this organization? We also learn different practices, skills, behaviors, competencies. As a collective, at the exterior side, we also, what we do, we actually, as a collective, we create strategies, we create processes, structures to order our organizations externally somehow. And also the fourth quadrant is actually where we collectively as an organization, we can also learn about our values, our purpose, and look at our patterns that we created along the way and wondering if these patterns are still serving us or we need to maybe support development of some new patterns which are more in line with our potential. And perhaps that's for the beginning from my side.
Tommy, I think you're muted. We cannot hear you.
Oh yeah, I wasn't muted automatically. Sorry for that. Darko and Andrea, thank you for your wonderful presentations. let's start with the really basic question, namely, why is organizational learning important in the youth field, and why it's important for the European youth programs? And this question goes to both of you.
Maybe you want to start.
Right. Yeah, sure. I think from the perspective of the programs, the reason why we want to foster organizational development, or why we want to focus on it, is that it amplifies the effect of the program. So part of what we want to do, the programs are a tool for supporting European youth work. They're a tool to make sure that it stays relevant, to make sure that it stays meaningful, to make sure that there is a common direction, that there is recognition for the field. And all of these things are a lot easier to do if the beneficiaries use the program strategically. For example, one of the things that in our sample the beneficiaries say that the youth programs do them is they are some credential for recognition. They say we work up to European standards. You can have life-changing experiences with us, and this they do anyways, right? But it has a lot of a bigger impact if the organization is aware of this and uses it strategically, maybe when it communicates with schools, maybe when it applies for funding at local or national level. And so I think a big reason why we want to do this with ReLearn and with the programs is to expand the effect of the programs. And then I also think it's a question of resilience. Many of the beneficiaries that we talk to say they do kind of live by the day or kind of operate reactively. And that works for a while. It works even for a very long time for many of them. But if we want them to stay resilient to losing important members, or stay resilient to things like COVID, stay resilient to really big changes like AI, then this does need a bit of strategy, and it looks like there's not that much of a culture of strategy yet. So this is another good reason why it is important to underline this and to help organizations go in that direction.
Before I give Darko a chance to reply, I would like to remind the audience that you have the possibility to ask questions on YouTube, on Facebook, or via using Slido. So Darko, how would you respond to this question?
Well, actually, maybe a bit more blunt. I would say organizational learning is because there's no choice. In a way, there's a famous quote in the leadership world when they say, when I stop learning, I stop leading. I think in the organizational world, it's more like when I stop learning, I stop living. And I think it's not just related to the youth field. I think it's generally for any organization. I think it's so inherent to life of the organization. So learning is actually what brings us forward, what brings us closer to the potential, to the purpose that we are for. It also makes us future fit. So the context changes, the world changes. I think we are actually ready, and we have to be ready to look at ourselves, to evaluate the old ways, the old patterns, strategies, and also wonder, okay, how do we continue? What's our role in the future to come? And I think learning is an excellent way to enter these conversations.
My next question will be about different sorts of organizations. Andrea, you mentioned that you group the beneficiary organization in types. Can you tell us more about these types? How do these different types of organizations engage in the youth programs?
Yes, so like I said, this was one of the things that we wanted to do with ReLearn. And first of all, before I say anything about types, it's important to say that the types are not exhaustive, because yes, we try to look for varied organizations. We try to recruit organizations that have different assets that we think are relevant. But we might not have found all types. And also they're not exclusive. So we did expect, and we also saw it in the conference, organizations to identify with more than one type. But they're relevant in the sense of being ways to think about the relationship between beneficiaries and the programs. And we found 4 types. The first type is organizations that are small and versatile, and whose kind of core component of activities is the programs. So that means they are but they're often dependent on the programs. And this is this means that the programs are supporting a lot of things that otherwise wouldn't be there, but it also means they can be easily swayed by changes in program priorities, and they have a harder time to be anchored on what's happening around them nationally. Then we have kind of a bit the opposite, which are organizations that have a strong identity beyond youth work. For example, they have an identity in sports, or they have an identity in policy making, or they have an identity in healthcare. We even have one like that, or others. And these are very grounded in their other fields, so to say, that is not youth work. And so they get professionals from that field, they get funding from that field, and they get their own methods of doing their things from that field. And they approach youth work as a way to diversify, as a way to approach young people in a meaningful way, which means sometimes they have a harder time relating to the programs and related to the non-formal methods that are common and the goals of the programs. But we definitely want them in, because this is how we expand and connect youth work to other fields. Then we have the beneficiaries that are very grounded in non-formal youth work or in community work. And these, in terms of methods and in terms of overall functioning, are the opposite of the ones that I just described, or the ones that have a niche other than youth work. They are comfortable with the ways that the programs operate, and it's their culture anyways, and it's their mission anyways, and it's easier for them to kind of say, okay, then we take funding from the programs because of what we're doing anyways. The programs, what they do for them is add a European dimension, inspire them to learn about new practices that are relevant for them, and the problem that they have when the youth work as a field is not recognized in their national context. And this is something that the youth programs can help with by being a European credential, like I said earlier. And then last but not least, we have municipalities. They're different from all the others because they're a lot more stable financially, and they are a lot more formal. And they usually use the European youth programs as a way to innovate ways to approach young people. So these are the four kinds of beneficiaries, and a bit of who they are, what they might need, and how they relate to the programs.
We have an audience question, but I won't be asking that yet. It will be the next one, so Andrea, be prepared for the audience question. Darko, you listened to Andrea's classification of different types of organizations. When you were listening to it, how did you feel? You have emphasized that change and learning go hand in hand. In your opinion, how do these different youth organizations, types of youth organizations, how do they come into contact with their own potential?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tommy. That's a good question. Well, sometimes the challenge that actually they are facing brings them to the moment of necessity to rethink maybe the original purpose, why we are here. Very often organizations have clarity in the beginning about why we are here, but perhaps maybe during time this purpose changes. And maybe good exercise for organization is to actually assess to what extent the original purpose is still valid for us, and to what extent actually we are living another kind of purpose, and maybe the third kind of purpose is what we put on our website, which of course creates kind of incoherence inside. And maybe a good conversation for that is, looking at ourselves, how the world is changing, what are the trends around, is our original purpose still valid, or we need to make some shifts, or we make some adjustments, and also maybe thinking about the fourth kind of purpose, which is maybe what is our future purpose. So this could be very interesting, I think, conversation inside. And in the way the world is changing, I think we described it pretty much in the Futures of Youth Work research, showing a lot of trends which actually impacting how youth work might possibly evolve till 2050. And they're not only technology. So we speak about demography, we speak about crisis of ethics and values, we speak about wars and continuous conflicts in the society, and many other trends. So when you compare what you're doing with what's happening around your world, around the world in you might be wondering, okay, so what's the way that we actually reach our potential, and what should be our purpose in the years to come?
Thank you, Darko. There's an audience question, like I said. We invite you to send more of them. We are happy to receive them. The first one is from Udo from German Youth National Agency. And Udo writes this: considering your valuable inputs and the main aim of Key Action 2, which is to support organizational development, how would you change Key A2 rules in the next program to better support organizational development? And I will probably ask Andrea, you first, to reflect on this, because in your presentation in the RayLearn conference, you mentioned that in the study RayLearn, you are taking a closer look at how specific tools and actions or the programs impact the learning and development of organizations. So if you want to, you can give us a bit of general information, and then if you have them, give us insights on Udo's question.
I think because there is a long list of tools that we looked at, maybe I would just concentrate on Key Action 2. We are diving deeper into it in the third round of focus groups, which is happening right now. So then I guess the meat of the question I don't have yet, or the meat of the answer I don't have yet, sadly. But what we have seen we have seen hints of something happening with Key Action 2 in the previous two interviews, to focus group. And this is that there is a tendency to underline innovation, to underline novelty, and to kind of forget that it takes a while for new things to be integrated. So this is also another tension that we were discussing before between innovation and integration. And so if I were to change something about Key Action 2 guidelines or procedures, it would be to focus more on what needs to happen for something to be integrated. For example, if you develop a new tool, of course, I know that there is like within what you have to do in a Key Action 2, you also have to promote it. You also have to have your website. But we know that this doesn't always have as much reach as we wanted. And we also know that some tools are great, but they're just not, they don't have enough time during the Key Action 2 project to be tried enough in context to see what works and what doesn't work. And so it would be great to recognize this and to be like, okay, if this is a relevant tool and we think we can use this in the field and the partners can use this, to be able to apply for funding to further this, which I don't even know if it's not possible right now, but I do think in everyone's head it's a bit like, that sounds like double, and how do you explain the added value of this? And so changing a bit this culture, which is something that maybe doesn't even involve changing the program policy. I don't know. But changing the mindset of the people who are writing applications and of the people who are reviewing the applications. I think this alone will already make a big change.
Maybe I have a 5 cents to that. I don't know if it's necessarily for Key Action 2, but lately we finished rewriting organizational management ticket for the youth partnership. And it struck us actually how little training opportunities are for organization nowadays, which used to be very different like 20 years ago. But nowadays, I think the focus goes a lot on training of youth workers, training trainers, others. But when you see opportunities for organizational development, they are actually currently pretty much missing. Maybe in the context of the future program development and conceptualization, maybe some kind of capacity building action there, which not necessarily not be only on development of competencies of staff, but also competencies of organizations as a whole, could be maybe interesting new element.
Yeah, and I think even this counts as something that could already be implemented. I think with the framework that we have now, I do think it would be possible to put together a Key Action 2 around organizational learning and offer trainings around organizational learning and maybe for teams instead of for individuals. It's possible. There's just the mindset is not really there, or is not so common.
I have a follow-up question for Darko. Andrea was talking about the tension between innovation and integration, and this to me seems to be close to what you were referring to as adaptive and generative learning. So what are your thoughts on adaptive and possibilities for generative learning in the context of European youth programs?
Yeah. Well, I think I referred a little bit about that already. I think when we speak about adaptive learning is more about how to do things differently, how to survive the current challenges, crises, and so on. But usually making smaller changes, while regenerative is more kind of rethinking the way we do things, looking at our culture inside of the organization, looking at our DNA as an organization and purpose that I already spoke before. I think Andrea was right saying that actually innovation also takes time, and it's not only that like you can do innovation usually in one single project. And indeed, it's an interplay. Every organization in its life, if you remember the graph I shown with the bell curve in the beginning, organizations inside of themselves, they need certain level of continuity. So they need certain level of something that keeps the fabric together, like inside. But at the same time, and it's not either or, at the same time, they need to evolve. So there's a little tension, maybe not only in the research as such, but there's a tension or polarity in every single organization between this continuity and evolution. So in order to survive, it's not just about doing things better or maybe improving a little bit of things from before, but it's also recognizing what are the good things that we've been doing before that are still valid. So a little bit like keeping the core. There is a interesting saying, I think, in English, when they say that without roots, there are no wings. So in a way, we need to acknowledge our roots, where we started. We need to acknowledge the core, check if the core is still valid, and also at the same time to innovate what is all around in terms of practices, in terms of strategies, ways of working, etc.
We have been talking about things on the upper level, and perhaps it's time to talk about the practical side. Andrea was talking about tension between innovation and integration. There are other tensions you identified, such as informality versus strategy, simplicity versus resilience, and funding alignment with mission integrity. Could you mention one or two examples of how these tensions are seen in practice?
Yeah. I can mention a specific example of the one that I said I think is one of the most interesting tensions between simplicity and informality and strategy. So this is a story from our sample, and the story is of a small organization that has been doing international volunteering since the beginning of EVS, so a very long time ago, and is still going. So it's like a 30+ years old organization, and they have been doing great at adapting to different challenges. Among them, at some point they saw that there were other offers for young people that were competing with what they were doing. So for example, au pairs or couchsurfing, and they decided to diversify and have more, as a result of this, they decided to diversify and have more local projects. And so they were doing great until COVID came. And the interesting part about them is that because they had done so well at gathering some sort of, or at having enough project funding, they were not missing funds, they were missing liquidity. So they didn't, it's not that they didn't have money, they just didn't have the money available to pay at the time to pay. And this problem was big enough that it almost wiped them out. They had to shrink their workforce, and they had a really hard time. But luckily, they could keep enough people and enough money to hire a consultancy and learn with the consultancy about cash flow and create a cash flow strategy. They survived COVID. Now they have 2 people working on their cash flow strategy. And this supposedly, or this makes them now more resilient. Of course, nobody could see COVID coming, but they are a lot more aware of how they handle their cash and a lot more able to take different blows and to see them coming, to know what to do. So then this could maybe speak for, strategy. Like, it's great to have a strategy. It's great to have a cash flow strategy. It would have been better for them had they had it before. But at the same time, they survived for like almost 30 years without it. And hiring a consultant, dedicating the time, to stop, to think, them, and not only them, many others could do it during COVID because there was not much else to do, So then the question is it really something we want to do, to invest so much time and money and, resources in creating strategies before we need them? Or does it not actually work better to just work reactively because of how the youth work environment is? We don't have the time, we don't have the money, so then we just react, and most of the time it works. And if it can work for 30 years, then is it really that wrong? So this would be an example of this tension playing out. You don't want to speak for too long, so I think this is enough.
So Darko, when listening to these practical examples, how do you view them based on your experience?
Well, I think managing tensions like that one, and probably the one that you mentioned before, I think it's part of the organizational management. I think that's so. From my coaching experience with leaders here, it's so easy to speak in either/or terms. So it's speak operation versus strategy, person focus, collective focus, centralization, decentralization. So there are a lot of polarities actually the organizations need to manage. So in that sense, I think it's a one of the essential skills in dealing with complexity. Also, it is about, okay, how do we keep both of these poles together? So can we at the same time be informal and be strategic? So strategic is not eating our informality. And I think there are good also ways how to merge these two and how to grow beyond that polarity. So I think the first step is actually to recognize that this is not either or, that in order to survive, in order to be ourselves as an organization, we need to be both. But then the question is also, how do we manage this polarity and possibly how to integrate and grow beyond? And I think that's also a process that could be done with organizations in their development.
Yeah, I think
we are approaching the end of our dialogue, but we still have time for the audience question, which I will modify a bit later on. The audience question goes like this. This is through Slido. You mentioned it already a bit, and this is the question: how can organizations build this culture of organizational learning more strategically and more long term? So the other way to frame this question would probably be, what do the beneficiaries of European youth programs need in order to develop a culture of organizational foresight? And you have 1 minute each, so take a pick. Who wants to be first?
I don't mind. I can go first. Okay. How do you develop it? I think we are at a stage right now where just thinking about it, like remembering that this is a thing that you could be doing and you could be thinking how to do, is already a really big step. We also see it from our beneficiaries that they were like, oh, we applied for mobility, which is not about organizational learning, and just the project management that is involved in the application, not even in the mobility, change our mind to be a lot more strategic. So I would say just one random thing, of course there's a lot of others, but I only have 1 minute, would be just acknowledge that it exists at the field level. Of course, this might be funny for the person who asked, who already acknowledges that it exists, but I think talking about it at the field level is an important thing.
Yeah, you might be also wondering what's blocking the culture of organization of learning, and how do we maybe release these blocks? And possibly one of the blocks is this huge pressure for performance. The organizations need to be successful each time they do the project. And probably this is one of the things, not the only one, that actually maybe strategically or structurally, maybe those who are designing the future European youth programs maybe can think of, that maybe there's more room for learning from failure, so to say, or learning from not so successful situations internally, it is more about organizational values, it's more about holding space, it's more about valuing learning as such. I think that's a more leadership role to model that and to create conditions for learning.
We started by asking why organizational learning matters, and I think this dialogue has provided answers that it really does, and they need to think about these things in the youth field in the years to come, starting from now. And for that, and for everything else, I thank you, Darko, and thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining this research dialogue.
Yeah, and thank you also from my side for joining the dialogue. And as always, you will be able to find this stream on YouTube. So please, sharing is caring, share it with your colleagues. And yeah, let's talk a bit more about the organizational development.
Yes, and I thank also everyone. I thank you, Tommy and Domagoj, and of course Andrea and Darko. I think it was really an interesting discussion. This was, as I said in the beginning, our last youth research dialogue in 25, but this series will continue, which makes me very happy, and I hope it's also useful for all of you out there. So we continue in February with the next one. If you want to, save the date already, we don't have a date yet, but it will be towards the end of February. Check out our website as always and social media channels. You will get all the updates there. And yeah, we are happy to welcome you very soon next year, and have a good end of the year and a good time. Goodbye.